In the last section, we got our first taste of generator syntax. One thing I want to remind you about is our working definition of generators right now, which is that it is a function that we can enter and exit multiple times. And this is compared to normal functions where normally we call them, they run, they return, and boom, that's it, we're totally done. And the next time we call it, we run the entire function all over again. So I know that we still have not quite mentioned what they would be used for or what that even means to kind of enter and exit again. That's what we're going to take care of inside this next section. Two other quick things I want to point out are that when we declare a generator, we use the function keyword and then place a star after it. So that's what kind of indicates, hey, we've got a generator function right here. It's marked by the presence of the star. Next, inside the generator function, we use the yield keyword. So this is a keyword right here. It's not a variable. It is an actual keyword that's been added with ES6. And we still haven't quite spoken about, hey, what's this actually mean right here? Again, that's something that we'll talk about in this section. Finally, when we called our generator, it appeared to return some object which had a .next property on it. So we called .next twice, and each time we called it, we got back an object that said first done false and done true. There also appears to be some sort of link between calling next right here and the yield keyword, because we noticed that when we added or removed the yield keyword, so I just commented it out right here, we can see that both times it says done true, but whenever I add in the yield keyword, all of a sudden it says first done false, and then it flips back over to done true. So clearly the yield keyword right here has some effect on what's going on with these .next calls. Okay, so let's continue on with this. What is the point of a generator? What's the purpose? What are we going to use it for? And that's what we're going to be covering here. So to explain what's going on with generators, we're going to follow an analogy of sorts. Okay, we're going to kind of lay out a story, and then we're going to see how we can model that story using a generator. So let's go through the story. So here we are. We start at the top, and we're going to go down here. So let me first set the scene, and then we'll walk through this path. So I want you to pretend for a second that you're sitting there at your desk or wherever you are, and you're saying to yourself, gee, I'm pretty darn hungry, but I don't have any food in my cupboards. I need to go to the store, probably buy some groceries, get something to eat because I'm really hungry. So maybe you stand up, you put some cash in your pocket, and you don't have a car for whatever reason, or the store is really close. So you go out to the sidewalk and you start walking along to the store with some cash in your pocket. And so that's kind of where we start right here. We're walking to the store and we've got some cash inside our pocket. And we're saying, okay, walk along the sidewalk, and eventually you get to the store and you're standing around the front of the store, and maybe there's some people out there, and you just announce to everyone, hey everybody, I am going to go into the store with some amount of money. Okay, I got this cash in hand, I'm gonna go into the store with some amount of money. And so you transition, so to speak here, from, we got this vertical line here that's meant to indicate a transition. You're going from the sidewalk, okay, our sidewalk right here, into the store, which is kind of like a totally different world of sorts. We're going from a sidewalk into the store, and when we do that, we are taking along some money with us, or some cash. Then you are inside the store, and who knows what you're doing inside there. You're buying some groceries, walking up and down the aisles, standing at the cash out, or the cashier, and eventually you finally walk back out from the store. So again, we've got this transition of sorts. But this time, instead of some instead of some cash, you've now got some groceries instead. And so when you get back out to the sidewalk, you say to everyone, hey everybody, I'm back and I got my groceries. I don't have any cash anymore, but I got groceries. This is fantastic. And then you walk down the sidewalk and you go back home, okay? So this is kind of the story we're going to follow here. We're going to try to model this story using generators. And the important thing that I want you to keep in mind is that we have a distinct transition right here, okay? A distinct transition where we go from money into the store, and then we come back out with some amount of groceries, okay? All right, so let's see if we can't do this. We're going to approach this by adding some comments first and adding a little bit of code to kind of model that story. The first thing I want to do is change the name of our generator from numbers, because numbers doesn't really make any sense anymore, to shopping instead. So we're going to just change our generator's name to shopping because it makes a little bit more sense. So I want to say that everything that's happening inside of this generator function is stuff on the sidewalk. Okay, this is all stuff that's happening on the sidewalk. And then everything that's happening outside of it is stuff in the store. So this is kind of our dividing line. Everything that's inside the generator is stuff on the sidewalk, and everything outside is stuff that's happening inside the store, so to speak. So I'm going to add in a couple more comments here to kind of illustrate our story. First, when we're inside the generator, this can be thought of as us walking down the sidewalk. So we're just walking down, having a good time, whatever. We got some cash in our pocket. And eventually, at some point in time, we go into the store with cash. Okay, so we're going to go into the store with cash. And so that indicates that we are transitioning from being inside of our generator function to inside of the store, which is now down here. And then I'm going to, besides the comments that we're going to add in, I'm also going to add a little bit of code as we go through this. So this is going to be a little bit of code. Don't worry, we're going to come back and talk about what it's doing. When we go from the sidewalk into the store with cash, so we're going to say yield cash, or like money, basically. So we're going to make our transition with some amount of, like basically something, right? We're going to make our transition with some cash. Then we're going to keep going through our example in here, and we're going to add some comments outside as well. So eventually, when we're back on the sidewalk, we're going to be walking back home. And I know I'm kind of going out of order here with these comments. Let's kind of just finish off the comments in the code, and then we can walk through the entire example. And putting this last comment here probably throws a wrench in all of it, but it's okay. Let's just finish up with the code, and then we'll walk through all the comments. So right before the yield statement, I'm also going to put in const stuff from store equals yield cash. At the bottom, we'll return stuff from store. And then just two more quick comments in here. Our first call to gen.next, I'm going to say leaving our house. And then the second call, I'm going to say leaving the store with groceries. I'm going to pass in one argument to the .next here of groceries, like so. Okay, so I know that last bit was a little bit confusing, but now that we've got all of our comments in here, it's going to be a lot easier to walk through the story here. Okay, so with our kind of process in mind over here, we got our process in mind, how we're going to the store and exchanging from groceries. Let's again look at our code. So first, we are down here leaving our house. When we leave our house, that starts off with our first call to gen.next. Okay, so I know that I said, well, this is all the stuff in the store, all the code down here. This is going to be the one kind of violation of that rule. So when I first call our generator shopping and create this kind of gen object that we've called right here, nothing happens inside of our generator. So just calling shopping doesn't actually invoke any code whatsoever. Okay, that's like very important point number one. It's not until we first call gen.next, so the first time we call gen.next, do we actually leave our house and we start walking down the sidewalk, and eventually we get to the point where we say, okay, it's time to go into the store. Okay, so when we first call gen.next, that is when we start actually executing some code inside of our generator function. Now, we walk down the sidewalk, we eventually get to the store, and eventually we're sitting there at like the sidewalk, the door to the store, and we say, okay, it is time to transition from the store, or excuse me, from the sidewalk into the store with some amount of cash. And that transition, that kind of like breaking over the line, this like literal arrow right here, is done with the yield statement. So we are yielding a value of cash. We are transitioning from the sidewalk into the store with some cash. That is the purpose of the yield statement. So at this point in time, we are pausing execution right here. We are transitioning from the generator back out to our store. We're kind of like, right here. We just walked into the store at this point in time. So we walk into the store and we're sitting around. Let's get some more lines in here. We walked in the store, we're walking up and down the aisles, good enough. And we finally purchase our stuff, and boom, we call .next again with some groceries. And so whenever we call .next, we've got this transition to go back out to the sidewalk, which essentially means back into the generator. So when I call .next right here with groceries, we are transitioning from the store back out to the sidewalk. And this time around, we've got some amount of groceries to go along with our, with our transition. So we say gen.next with groceries. We re-enter our generator at the yield statement, like exactly right here. So now you can kind of imagine that instead of this saying yield cash, you can kind of imagine that it really says groceries because we passed in groceries to .next. Groceries are then assigned to stuff from store. Okay, we are now back on our sidewalk. We finish walking back home, and eventually we return with the stuff that we got from the store. And so our final value here is groceries. Okay, so I know this example has been confusing, a little bit convoluted. The point here, like the big thing that I wanted to illustrate above all, like above everything else, was that the first time that we called gen.next, we started executing our code inside of our function here until we got to the first yield statement. Once we got to a yield statement, we yielded a value. So we kind of like exited the generator, so to speak. We left the sidewalk with some amount of cash or like a variable of sorts, in this case cash. So you'll notice that our first call to gen.next here has a value of cash. Then we're walking along the store, we're doing whatever we want to do, and eventually we say, okay, time to go back to the sidewalk. We re-entered our generator function by calling .next again, and that resumed execution from this exact statement right here, from like basically the yield statement. We passed in a variable of grocery, or excuse me, a string of groceries, and so that kind of replaced this yield statement right here with groceries. And so groceries got assigned to stuff from store. We then returned stuff from store, and our value was groceries. That came back out, and we've now got done of false. All right. So this is kind of the process we're going through here. So at this point in time, you might be thinking, okay, like this kind of makes sense. Like we execute, when we call next, we execute some code until we hit a yield statement. And then eventually we call next again and we re-enter at the yield statement. And then we eventually like return something here. So, okay, maybe that makes sense. But again, why in the world are we doing this? This seems so confusing. Why are we doing this? Let's continue in the next section, start looking at a little bit more practical example. And I think this might start to make a little bit more sense. So let's continue now in the next section, now that we've got a better sense of what's going on with this yield keyword.